Listen very carefully and follow my instructions. Prepare your brain for the Live Cortex Nootropic Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Live Cortex Nootropics Podcast number 5. The title of this podcast is, Are Nootropics Safe to Take Long Term? This, to me, I think a lot of other nootropics users out there that pass the initial excitement period of experimentation and enter the period of continued use is a super interesting question. It's a question that I've asked myself over the years, and in some cases, like for different chemicals, for certain new chemicals that I might come across, I still ask myself that question. The main reason I think nootropic users want to confirm the legitimacy of taking nootropics long term is because we see the major benefit they have on our brains now. And for some smart drugs and or nootropics, it seems fairly obvious that over the long term, they'd be helpful in staving off age-related cognitive decline, as well as optimizing performance from baseline. It just seems very obvious to people. We're going to talk about specific compounds like CDP, choline, uridine monophosphate, aniracetam, and others. The first two having a major role in the continued maintenance and building of the brain's primary phosphatide, phosphatidylcholine. We'll talk about the acetylcholine system and how that seems to be implicated in the downfall of the functionality of the human brain as we age, particularly in the disease Alzheimer's, the scary Alzheimer's. And I want to compare nootropics to ethanol to offer a well-angled perspective on the safety and practicality of long-term nootropics usage. So I won't keep you waiting any longer. Prepare your brains for the Live Cortex Nootropics podcast. Number 5, coming right up. I got to tell you, having been an entrepreneur for 6 years, I will not go through the rest of my life without taking aniracetam, piracetam, uridine monophosphate, Alcar, CDP, choline. You can always have a better brain.
The Live Cortex Nootropic Podcast is about to begin.
All right, everyone, let's get started. Before we get into it, though, I want to quick read a review from a user of the Cortex Nootropic stack to give you an idea of how the product is being received out there in the nootropics market. This is from Jim Ledley from San Diego, California, a place that I want to move to. Jealous of you, Jim. I work in risk management and I'm always crunching numbers and looking out for risks. One of the things that's been happening to me lately is that somewhere around 2 p.m. I start to lose the ability to function in this capacity, and it's been messing with my productivity over the last few years. Literally, the first dose of Cortex and I was pushing through number crunching until about 6 p.m. without pause. I didn't even want to stop. Okay, Jim, you might want to give it just a little bit of a break there. I use L-tyrosine and alpha-GPC, and it helped me to a certain extent, but now Cortex is the only stack I need. Well, thanks, Jim. We appreciate that review right there. And for those of you looking to snag a bottle of the Cortex Generation 1 Nootropic, head on over to livecortex.com and grab yourself a bottle of what's being called the best natural nootropic that exists. All right, and I think this is an acceptable segue into examining the safety of long-term nootropics usage. I'm going to be reading from an earlier blog post on livecortex.com that encompasses a lot of what I want to say here about the long-term usage of nootropics. So we'll kind of bounce back and forth from my commentary and my additional thoughts on the matter to clips straight from the Live Cortex blog. First, though, I think this is a fitting kind of introduction. I want to examine the idea that most of what we as Americans put in our bodies as it is are far worse than a lot of nootropics. We put hygiene products in our bodies that are filled with potentially carcinogenic parabens, particularly in lotions and hair products. A lot of folks take 2 to 3 minute sessions 20 or more times per day to breathe in carcinogenic compounds from cigarettes. A great majority of the adult population consumes 1 to 5 drinks per week and some 1 to 3 drinks per day of alcoholic substances that are not only carcinogenic but can also worsen a variety of other physiological ailments that could eventually contribute to carcinogenesis itself, like GERD, acute acid reflux, or laryngopharyngeal reflux. And a disproportionate amount of Americans consume stabilizers and preservatives in processed foods that can cause cell damage at various levels, leading to a wide variety of potential problems. Not to mention there are millions of Americans taking proton pump inhibitors to suppress stomach acid, drugs that have been shown to damage the body's capacity to absorb vitamins and minerals, calcium being one of those, and hip fractures and bone leakage being one of the consequences of that. Should I go on? You get the drift. The major point that I want to really get across by divulging all of that information is just having people look at this from a different angle. If you look at what we do every day, we have to first examine, if we're looking at the safety of something long-term, I think we're looking at whether or not it's going to negatively affect us in some way, whether that's going to be in damaging the liver, or it's going to be in damaging the brain, or it's going to be in damaging some other part of the body. In doing so, we have to look at what exactly we already do to damage our our bodies and really the capacity for our bodies to remain resilient throughout that process, and how long people live kind of in the face of how we beat ourselves up, considering some of the above things that I talked about. We have to look at this first to really get an angle on whether or not it's good to take nootropics long term. It's as if what we've done so far over the course of the last 50 years is completely discount the negative effects of some of the things that we're doing every day. But we've implemented these things into our everyday lives anyway, and we do them as it is. We take proton pump inhibitors, we drink alcohol, we smoke cigarettes, we put hygiene products on our bodies, and some of those hygiene products have chemicals that have been researched heavily and point to the fact that they might be carcinogenic in our bodies. And a lot of these products have actually been found in the biopsies of certain tumors, particularly breast cancer tumors. We breathe car exhaust, we breathe hairspray chemicals, we wear hairspray chemicals, we wear hair gel, we clean our kitchens with chemicals, we clean our bathrooms with chemicals, we clean our floors with chemicals, we clean our living rooms with chemicals. And then to top it all off, we sit and exist and live and breathe in those fumes. I mean, that's why natural cleaning supplies has become a kind of major market in America, because people are concerned about this kind of stuff. So you're starting to get the picture. I want to read from you a quick excerpt of the Live Cortex Nootropic blog on a blog post called, "Are Nootropics Safe to Take Long Term? I Say Yes, and Here's Why." It's called Comparing Ethanol to Aniracetam. Let's do a fun one. Let's compare ethanol to the widely used smart drug aniracetam. Doses for aniracetam tend to be between 500 and 2,000 milligrams, but I found that for me and a lot of other people I know that experiment with nootropics, smaller doses work just fine, and in some cases it works better. For example, me right now, sublingually, 80 to 100 milligrams is the optimal dose. If taken in a capsule, it's between 250 and 350 milligrams. By the way, folks, that has since changed because the usage of aniracetams kind of really has to do with the quantity of acetylcholine in your brain, so that can change. That is nowhere close to the recommended dose for aniracetam, which typically tends to be 750 milligrams or higher. But remember, the vendors you buy aniracetam from want you to buy more aniracetam. But let's be a bit generous and go with 350 milligram dose of aniracetam. Aniracetam has never, to my knowledge, been demonstrated as even remotely dangerous. In fact, to the contrary. It's clearly been shown to be neuroprotective in a variety of ways, as well as not to increase liver enzymes, indicating its level of safety being extremely high, and that the compound is very well tolerated. Here are some other interesting things to note. People do not take aniracetam, then get behind the wheel and crash their cars because their cognition is impaired. People do not start fights with other people in bars because they had one too many aniracetams. There's not one person in prison right now because they took aniracetam and it altered their state so much that it prompted them to commit a serious crime. Admittedly, there is no data here, but I'm quite sure there aren't a whole lot of relationships being destroyed because a member of the relationship is improving their brain using scientifically backed, neurologically enhancing agents. But all of that is true for alcohol. Just wanted to point that out. Okay, so back to the details of our comparison. In every 1.5 ounce shot of alcohol, and you can insert most liquors here, there's an average of 0.6 ounces of ethanol. The average person does not drink just one shot, though, nor two. When people are out drinking, they take shots. It's typically between 2 and 5, and for those that take it further, it rises into the 2 to 10 shot range. But let's just take 2 shots here. There are centenarians that cite taking a few shots of alcohol at lunch every day as being one of the facilitators of their long lives. And centenarians, by the way, are people that live to 100 or more. Let's examine that for a second. If there are people on the planet that take a few shots of alcohol every day and live to become centenarians, well, we know quite clearly that there are mounds and mounds of research piled up to suggest that alcohol consumption in high quantities lowers life expectancy and facilitates the onset of disease. Then why is anyone concerned about taking an extremely small dose of a nootropic that for most people has no side effects and improves their brain performance? Remember when we cited that there are no significant increases in liver enzymes when taking aniracetam? Well, here, and I'm linking to a study in this blog post, which I'll link to below, it clearly asserts that liver injury may be caused by direct toxicity of metabolic byproducts of alcohol as well as by inflammation induced by these products. And it goes on to further discuss that phenomenon. It's clear that there is a strong correlation between liver damage and alcohol consumption. But if there are certain centenarians that drink alcohol for years in low doses every day of their lives, it's certainly pretty plausible to assume that taking low-dose nootropics, which I believe is the only way for people to take nootropics, on and off for years isn't going to harm your health, brain, or anything else. Now, I'm not saying aniracetam is better than alcohol or alcohol is better than aniracetam. I'm just trying to create a perspective through which to look at this question, the question of whether or not nootropics are safe to take long term. You get the drift. So now I'd like to talk about certain nootropics and their ability to repair the brain from the decline that happens as we age. The contention here being that not only are nootropics not harmful to take long term, certainly healthy nootropics that is, but they may be required for some people to prevent the cognitive decline that inevitably happens with aging. I've done quite a bit of research on the substance CDP choline, which is one of the main reasons it's in the Cortex nootropic stack, and through the years I've come to understand that CDP choline seems to play a variety of roles in repairing the brain from various ailments and modes of decline, particularly as it relates to memory. There's a pretty long study done on Cognizin, which is the brand name of a product that delivers a patented form of CDP choline, that I want to read the abstract from, wherein they state that some of the therapeutic applications of CDP choline, some of which are stroke and vascular dementia. Pharmacological treatment of cerebrovascular disorders was introduced at the beginning of the 20th century. Since then, a multitude of studies have focused on the development of a consensus for a well-defined taxonomy of these disorders and on the identification of specific patterns of cognitive deficits associated with them, but with no clear consensus. Nevertheless, CDcholine, which by the way, guys, is another name for CDP choline, has proved to be a valid treatment in patients with cerebrovascular pathogenesis for memory disorders. A meta-analysis performed on the entire database available from the clinical studies performed with this compound confirms the experimental evidence from the animal studies which have repeatedly described the multiple biological actions of CDcholine in restoring both cell lipid structures and some neurotransmitter functions. The conclusion here is that CDP choline has a great ability to restore cell lipid structures and some neurotransmitter functions. It may not be the cure-all in all of these patients because they are recovering from serious age-related decline like vascular dementia, which may come about after multiple decades of cognitive decline, but it does offer a restorative element to the dynamic. My contention, and this is where we jump into theory land a bit here, which I think is necessary to concoct a hypothesis about certain things, basically anything, is that compounds like CDP choline, when dosed correctly, and that might be sparingly but with some consistency, can prevent many forms of cognitive decline in neurological systems from happening, particularly the functionality of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine and possibly the functionality of dopamine itself and its receptors. CDP choline itself may in fact be safe to take long term, but under the condition that you cycle it, because you may not need to provide raw materials for acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter, and you might not want to consistently increase dopamine receptor densities, which is another feature of CDP choline usage. But it may be useful to be able to have your finger on the dial to optimize the acetylcholine and the dopamine system when you need to. Having been an avid nootropics user over the years and advocate for smart drugs, I am now able to recognize cognitive deficits in everyday people when it seems that they can't find like the word that they're looking for, or they're unable to have like a normal kind of fluency in speech. What are we to attribute this to, right? Some sort of unexplainable brain fog, or is it a neurotransmitter imbalance or inadequacy? I'd confidently say that in lots of cases, aside from those induced by some sort of toxin in the environment messing with their brains, it's a neurotransmitter imbalance in the brain. Would those people be remedied if they took a precursor to the right neurotransmitter that was in question here at the root of their problem? The answer is yes. I'm not going to hedge here. Would they be able to find the word that they were looking for in their brains if they had the capacity to find it and use it based on the increased functionality of their brains based on the usage of a nootropic? Yes. And they'd be able to do so flowingly if they had the right quantity of the neurotransmitter in question, or if it was working properly. It's funny because in my experience, acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter, seems to disproportionately be the culprit in most verbal fluency issues. It's like that's why when folks take stacks like the Cortex stack or even the Alpha Brain stack, they notice enhancements in verbal recall. We can take the example of Rita Levi-Malticini, who I did a podcast about on either 001 or 002 on the Live Cortex Nootropic podcast, who was responsible for discovering nerve growth factor in, I believe like her first discovery, it was in 1956, but somewhere around 1979, it became a lot more mainstream and well-known, and in 1986 or so, she won a Nobel Peace Prize because of it. Nerve growth factor is this peptide that basically facilitates the production of new neurons in your brain. It's essentially a growth factor for neurons in your brain, a precursor possibly to neurons, and seemingly one of the best nootropics out there. This woman took this substance for 30 or so years. She died at 103 years old, somewhere around 2013. So if we we can just look at that example specifically, it's a good example for us if we find the right nootropics. And this is where we'd be looking at things like CDP-choline, uridine monophosphate, aniracetam, possibly some of the other racetams, certainly nerve growth factor. Then I think we can plausibly make the determination that these nootropics help people to function optimally neurologically as they age, to prevent cognitive decline, to keep them at their baseline, and in some cases to keep people functioning above baseline, which is not a bad thing, seems to be totally a good thing, and seems not to come with many side effects. I like to look at people like Rita Levi-Montalcini and the woman who created Noopept as great examples of this. I mean, these are people that for the woman who created Noopept, I don't know how old she is now, but the last interview I heard from her on Smart Drug Smarts was like she was 80-something years old. And though her accent is a little hard to understand, she has got the verbal fluency with the best of them. Her brain seems to be working awesome. And like I gave the example in the earlier podcast about Rita Levi-Montalcini, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for discovering nerve growth factor, her brain works amazingly. I essentially discover Rita Levi-Montalcini through trying to research people who've been taking nootropics for quite some time. And then also, I'm a nootropics, an avid nootropics researcher. I research as much as I can. If I'm bored, I'll research smart drugs. It's literally my favorite thing to do. And through that time, I came across Rita many times and read many articles. In fact, I think the first article, by the way, that I read was an article called, it was something to the extent of, is this her lifelong secret, or is the secret to longevity, nerve growth factor, or something to that effect, where they go to talk about this woman who's 100 and something years old, but has been taking nerve growth factor eye drops in her eyes for the last 30 years, and she's got the intellectual functionality of a 22-year-old. It's looking at guys like Ray Kurzweil, who, in addition to nootropics, so some of the supplements in his stack are nootropics, has been taking a variety of supplements over the years to aid in preventing heart disease, reversing certain health problems that he's had, and to improve everything from gut functionality and digestion to brain functionality. I mean, one of the elements in Ray Kurzweil, the futurist stack, is phosphatidylcholine. I think he takes it intravenously. And another element is L-carnitine. I mean, these are nootropics here. And I want to read a quick excerpt from Wikipedia about Ray Kurzweil so you can just get an idea of who we're talking about. And by the way, he's 68 years old and is still alive and healthy. Ray Kurzweil is an American author, computer scientist, inventor, and futurist. Aside from futurology, he is involved in fields such as optical character recognition, text-to-speech synthesis, speech recognition technology, and electric keyboard instruments. He has written books on health, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, the technology singularity, and futurism. Kurzweil is a public advocate for the futurist and transhumanist movements and gives public talks to share his optimistic outlook on life extension technologies and the future of nanotechnology, robotics, and biotechnology. Essentially, I'm just coming back to me now, essentially when Wikipedia talks about biotechnology and when Ray Kurzweil engages in things that has to do with biotechnology, partially he's talking about supplements and partially he's talking about nootropics. And by the way, in addition to phosphatidylcholine, which by the way, Ray Kurzweil does take intravenously and is the major phosphatide in the brain that you can get when you combine uridine and CDP-choline, or CDP-choline by itself, or uridine by itself, and to some extent is going to contribute to that phosphatide. He also takes GABA, melatonin, quercetin, nextrotine, and get this, alpha-glycerylphosphorylcholine, which by the way is a well-known nootropic known as alpha-GPC. So, I mean, one of my rationales for taking nootropics long-term, and a lot of them being safe, the ones you need to do your research on and to determine whether or not they've got a level of efficacy like some of the nootropics we talked about, is looking at some of these people who have lived a long time, who have done so in great brain function, who have done a lot of great things and have taken nootropics along the way. The argument that I've always made and that I'm making here is that for a lot of nootropics, really the end result is good performance now, staving off cognitive decline, and neuroprotection. Neuroprotection is, and through its various mechanisms, somehow the compound is protecting the brain from some sort of damage, whether that's a toxin in the environment or age-related decline. I'm going to read a list to you briefly of a bunch of different supplements, basically just chemical agents, that have been proven to be neuroprotective. You will find that the common trend in this list is that most of these are in fact nootropics. Here we go. Number 1, AC11. Number 2, acetyl L-carnitine. Number 3, acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. Number 4, acetylcysteine. Number 5, anti-protein aggregation agents. Number 6, Bacopa monnieri. Number 7, caffeine. Number 8, cannabinoids. Number 9, caspase inhibitors. Number 10, citicoline or CDP-choline, which we talked about before. Number 11, crocin. Number 12, curcumin. Number 13, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but it's essentially EPO. Number 14, estrogen. Number 15, fish oil. Number 16, ginseng RD. Number 17, L-theanine. Number 18, lithium. Number 19, melatonin. Number 20, minocycline. Number 21, nicotine. Number 22, Noopept. Number 23, PQQ. Number 24, progesterone. Number 25, resveratrol. Number 26, selagelene. 27, simvastatin. Number 28, targeted hypothermia. Number 29, trophic factors. This includes BDNF, CTNF, or CNTF rather, IGF-1 and VEGF. Number 30, vinpocetine, well-known nootropic. Number 31, vitamin E. Okay, so the point here is that a lot of these agents, for those of you who take nootropics or understand nootropics and are familiar with some of those agents, a good percentage of them are nootropics. In fact, somewhere around 75% of them. Let's look down the list real quick and just sort of give you an idea of which ones are nootropics. The first one, AC11, that's nootropic. Second one, acetyl-L-carnitine, nootropics. Number 3, acetylcholine esterase inhibitors. These could be huperzine A, tinantapine, or something similar. These are nootropics. Acetylcysteine, you could consider this a nootropic because it's really the aids in mitochondrial enhancement, and I think that applies in the brain. Number 6, Bacopa monnieri, definite nootropic. Caffeine is number 7, definite nootropic. Number 10, citicoline, major nootropic. Let's see, moving down the list here. Number 15, fish oil, definitely a nootropic. Number 17, L-theanine, totally a nootropic. Melatonin, I don't know if you'd consider that a nootropic, but I sort of do based on my broader understanding of what nootropics are. 21, nicotine, definitely a nootropic. Number 22, Noopept, definitely a nootropic. And moving on to the rest of the list, let's see, trophic factors, vinpocetine, 29 and 30. Those are both nootropics. So when putting this all together, I think we have to look at a number of different things. We look at what we do already to our bodies. We have to look at what we consume daily, what kind of chemical agents we use to clean our dishes and our houses. We have to look at the chemical agents that we put on our bodies. We have to look at our consumption of alcohol. We have to look at the metabolic byproducts of alcohol and how they can be carcinogenic, and how maybe that's true, and that just looking at the comparison between alcohol consumption and nootropics is enough for you to say, okay, taking nootropics long term is a safe bet, especially when compared to alcohol. But also another perspective there would be some centenarians in certain places live to 110 years old and cite at least partially their capacity to live that long as being like them sitting down at 3 p.m. and drinking a shot of whiskey or 2 shots of whiskey and having a few beers. Now, who knows? And that's highly unscientific, and that really might not be the basis for them making it to 110 years old. But that offers a different perspective, but still proves our perspective. It still gives us a little more ammo here, and that's that something that has been proven over and over again to be potentially carcinogenic and to have damaging effects on the liver, to facilitate violent and destructive behavior among people, and to be widely accepted as generally unhealthy. People can consume those things at varying degrees and still make it to 110 years old. People can consume these substances at varying degrees and still live a very long time. Now, I think we also have to consider that some of these people, particularly the centenarians in the blue zone, some of which report drinking alcohol as part of their kind of daily stack of things that they do, also have other things that contribute to life longevity as well. Like a lot of them spend a lot of time with other people, so there's always a community thing going on. A lot of them spend a lot of time learning. Most of them spend a lot of time outside and with each other, so they've got that combination there. And some of them in remote areas of Italy frequently drink red wine. So one shouldn't really ask the question, are nootropics safe to take long term? I think it's a responsible question, but one should ask the question, considering an otherwise healthy life and a human doing everything they can to prevent disease, to keep the gut functioning well, to keep the rest of their physiology functioning well, to keep their immune system up to par, and every other attempt to engage in practices that may extend life and facilitate longevity, are nootropics an acceptable addition to that strategy? And I gotta say, guys, bias or not, me having a product or not, I have to say the answer is I believe that nootropics are safe to take long term, depending on the nootropic. I believe that one should identify which nootropics might be beneficial for them and really go into the field of nootropics and taking nootropics, understanding which neurotransmitters these nootropics are going to affect and or which receptor sites in the brain certain neurotransmitters are going to affect. That no human is smart in making a decision to do anything without fully understanding or at least partially understanding and then further experimenting with the repercussions, that we should understand what things are doing to our brains. When I have conversations with people about cortex or nootropics in general, or if I sit down and have a conversation with somebody and I recognize that they're having some sort of cognitive deficit right as we're speaking and I try to sort of talk to them about why that might be happening, they don't know. Nobody really has an idea. They're not thinking about dopamine and acetylcholine and shortages in neurotransmitters or a misfire somewhere in their brain. None of this stuff even crosses their mind. They don't even think about the neurology behind it. And they should. More people need to understand the neurology behind their brain functions and their brain states throughout the day. And that is the basis for healthy experimentation with anything, and certainly nootropics. So in summary, obviously my position is that nootropics are in fact safe to take long term. That doesn't mean that all nootropics are safe to take long term. It certainly doesn't group all of these chemicals that can be considered nootropics into one category and categorizes them as safe to take long term. It just means that certain nootropics for certain people probably are safe to take long term, and in my opinion are in fact safe to take long term. But again, we have to come back to the idea that one has to do the research to determine which nootropics that might be, and also to determine when they should cycle on and off of said nootropics. One of these sort of balancing games that is constant in the nootropics community that would be apparent to anyone who's taken nootropics for a great quantity of time is the racetam-choline balance. This is a very simple stack, a very well-known stack that has a lot of history behind it and a lot of research and a lot of user experiences, where you've got two chemicals that essentially balance each other out. And one chemical would deplete the other chemical, the racetam in this case, possibly depleting stores of acetylcholine, which is why you have to take, with racetams, you got to take a choline source for most people. So in this dynamic here, you have to understand the balancing act. If I take 1,000 milligrams of oxyracetam and I don't take it with a choline source, and I do this for 10 days, then I'm probably going to end up in a cholinergic deficit at some point. Maybe the dosages vary. But then once I get to that place where I feel like I'm in a cholinergic deficit, then I might want to consider taking something like uridine monophosphate and CDP choline together for the subsequent 30 days so that I could get myself back to a level of cholinergic functioning that is normal, or even a cholinergic surplus. Now, do I expect everybody to be a biohacker and to engage in the degree of precision and experimentation that a lot of us nootropic users, smart drug users, and biohackers do? No. The answer is no. And for those people, they may want to do a little more research before they try nootropics, experiment with nootropics, or even think that nootropics are safe to take long term. But for those of us who understand, and for those willing to do the research and willing to try to do anything to improve their brains so long as it's safe over the long term, because they're conscious enough to know that the brain is declining as they age and they need to fix it, repair it, and keep themselves functioning optimally, experimenting with nootropics granularly and safely is a great answer. And finally, one more time, all things considered, especially all of my various clauses throughout this podcast, my answer is yes. I believe that certain nootropics are safe to take long term. But cycle wisely, do your research, and draw your own conclusions. And let us not forget that every day, for the majority of us around the world, we actually wake up in our houses, in our homes, and we brew a nootropic. Yeah, you didn't know about that? Here's what it's called. Coffee. Check this out. Caffeine, the molecule, binds to receptor sites, adenosine receptor sites in the human nervous system, telling the brain that adenosine isn't actually present. Adenosine stimulates signals that tell your body it's time to rest and activates the responses necessary to engage in full and sustained sleep. As a result of this happening, your brain actually doesn't identify adenosine and recognize that it's there, and nerve activity doesn't slow down. If anything is a nootropic here in this conversation, it's caffeine. That's essentially what all nootropics do. They facilitate the functioning of certain neurotransmitters or bind to certain neurotransmitter receptor sites to springboard cognitive function in some way, whether that's promoting wakefulness, keeping you alert, or keeping you intellectually in a great place, or promoting other cognitive abilities. My experimentation with nootropics so far has spanned 6 years, and not only am I still alive and functioning well, but I'm the founder of 2 companies, 2 of which are operational, fully operational every day that I run, manage, and build. I do so with great brain performance, and my capacity to engage in intellectual tasks, as well as tasks that require my brain to work outside in the fluid world, has only only increased over the years. My memory's gotten better. My verbal fluency has gotten better. My navigational efficacy in the world, based on the fact that my brain is working better, has gotten better. My nootropic experimentation and usage over the coming years will continue to expand. I will continue to learn about which chemicals do which things to my brain and how that affects my everyday functioning. I will take the research that I've done so far and continue doing more research and continue doing more experimentation to find out what works and what doesn't, what aids in preventing cognitive decline, what makes my brain function better now, and whole hosts of other things. And perhaps what's most exciting to me about nootropics and using nootropics long term is essentially my kind of theme on why biohacking itself is really awesome. And that's because you get to have your finger on the dial controlling your physiology with the capacity to optimize it whenever you want. If you have not tried the Cortex Nootropics, snag a bottle now. That is our flagship stack that combines uridine monophosphate and CDP choline for a very synthesized, synergized stack. It's got some Bacopa monnieri in it and artichoke extract, which flows very well with the rest of the stack, and so far has been impressing the nootropics community. Otherwise, thanks so much for listening. Subscribe to the podcast here. Subscribe to us on YouTube at the Live Cortex Nootropic channel. And hey, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for coming.
Pick up a bottle of the Cortex Nootropic at www.livecortex.com.